I think there's a special skill set that is required to be an entrepreneur. You have to have some form and shape of delusion within yourself.
Speaking of delusion, Maha, as someone who's building a ride-hailing business, and so I remember like
That's
Maha,
the best segue.
Maha and I, like we first spoke about the BusCaro 2021, and the first thing I said was, "So Maha, what's your other idea?"
What a lot of people need to understand is number one, VC funding is not for everyone. And actually, VC funding isn't for most businesses.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that you're not a success if you don't raise VC funding, right? And I say this as a VC.
And I think we're waiting for everybody else to fail so that we can succeed. I think that's a general mindset within the Pakistani ecosystem, which is very, very unfortunate.
I think it takes three things to be an entrepreneur. And I think it takes this delusion that Halima talked about. I think you have to care about something deeply. And three, I think you have to lose all respect for yourself, because that's what a fundraising journey looks like.
हम small manufacturing businesses की बात कर रहे थे, and they were like, सबसे पहले before being a manufacturing business, you have to be a power generation company. हो गया record शुरू है. Oh shit, okay. Thanks so much for coming today, guys. आज का जो हम conversation करना चाह रहे हैं, the objective is कि we want to help people who are on the fence of whether they should jump into entrepreneurship or not. And we want to help them make that decision and make the decision easier. So all three of you are entrepreneurial or entrepreneurs themselves. सबने एक टाइम पे नौकरी भी देखी हुई है, अपनी दूसरी चीज़ें भी देखी हैं, and you've all made the conscious decision of jumping into entrepreneurship or starting something of your own. So the first thing I want to understand is, what is your framework of, like, first, who should be an entrepreneur, who should not? And ये नहीं कि एक बंदा हमेशा से एक stagnant वही रहता है. I think people change and they have different circumstances, and circumstances dictate whether you should be an entrepreneur or not. So yeah, so who should jump into entrepreneurship, and what are the core motivations that good entrepreneurs have? Starting with Kalsoom, because I know, Kalsoom, you've done like incubators, you've tons of work on this, and you've dealt with so many entrepreneurs, right? As an investor and running I2I Accelerator as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think first of all, there's a distinction, right, in entrepreneurship itself between opportunity entrepreneurs and necessity entrepreneurs. So when you talk about who should jump into it, some people just don't have the privilege of that choice. They become entrepreneurs out of necessity. I think your question is actually more posed towards opportunity entrepreneurs. So people like Maha and Halima, right? Of people that saw an opportunity, look to build a solution for it. I think it's really hard to say someone should not be an entrepreneur, because I think if you have the intention and you want to build, great. I think the better question is, what kinds of people make successful entrepreneurs or make like good founders, right? And I think at the end of the day, I really like Angela Duckworth has this idea of like this different, like the combination, right, of conviction and confidence in what you're building. And I think that's really important, is having the conviction and the belief in what you're building. And then from a character trait perspective, obviously having the drive, having the ambition. A lot of founders that we all know, including the ones in our portfolio, because we've actually assessed this, have a high amount of impatience. So they're not only they're impatient about solving the problem, right? Which means that from a drive perspective, if they're high driving, they're going to constantly trying to build and solve and try to do it as quickly as possible. I also think that the founders that are really good and people that should be entrepreneurs should have like a really healthy amount of curiosity constantly. Constantly asking questions, constantly pushing their own limits, reading things on a regular basis, watching things on a regular basis, having the sense of a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, right? So this is not how things are. This is, you're looking at things aspirationally, how things can be, right? And then I think also for me personally as an investor now, I think I look at, does this founder have a strong sense of humility about what they don't know? What do they know what they don't know? Because I think you can find entrepreneurs that fill all the other characteristics, but if they feel very arrogant about what they're building, they're going to be stuck in doing something that might be the wrong direction for a really long time and may not be able to see the forest for the trees, right? And be able to hear out of the noise, hear the feedback that's important and build better. They're not going to be able to find the right people that can come and meet kind of and fill the holes of what they don't have. And so I think for me personally, those are the traits that matter.
So, in terms of, so I understand, like, I don't think anyone should not be an entrepreneur, but what are some of the worst motivations that you've seen people have to
make
become
money.
Yeah,
To become a millionaire.
to become a millionaire? Oh shit! Okay.
I mean, that's a
like,
bad motivation because
So,
I
I mean,
think
that being the sole motivation is a bad motivation.
I mean,
right?
sure. If you want to make a lot of money doing what you're doing, great. But if you want to become, if you want to build a unicorn and go in with that mindset, great if you have the ambition to do it. But if you want to just do it solely for, I want to become a millionaire tomorrow, it's like you just become so driven by that versus like, what is the problem you're trying to solve, right?
Yeah.
Which at the end of the day, the best founders, and two of them are here, are solving for the biggest problem that they can and trying to build for that versus actually saying it's about that bottom line. And ideally, the bottom line comes because you're trying to solve that problem, right? And you're trying to solve it in the most efficient way, in a way that you listen to your users, all of that. But I think that to me it's not a wrong motivation, but I think it's a misguided motivation because I feel like it's not, because I think as you guys know, and I know this as well, it's not like you're going to make $1 million tomorrow. I mean,
Yeah,
maybe
it's
if
a
in
long-term
some,
thing.
and maybe in some spaces, sure. But you're going to be eating, sleeping, breathing your business. It's going to be the most unglamorous thing ever for a really long time. And the most successful founders that we've seen in the world have had those really, really hard journeys in what they're building. And so if they had done it purely for the money, they would have gotten out, way
Way
before
earlier,
it became
yeah.
a success. But they did it because they were driven by the problem that they were solving. And so I think it's a great thing if that happens, but it shouldn't be your sole motivation.
But okay. So Halima, you've done a different kind of business before as well, right? So in terms of say venture-backed businesses, जिसमें your motivation is कि unicorn बनानी है, एक बहुत बड़ी company बनानी है. But not all businesses are like that, right? Some businesses are your side pay, great cash flow generating businesses, and a lot of people are so well suited to doing those businesses as opposed to creating like humongous value in this one. So how do you feel about this? And also chime in and as a Mayman who has seen like businesses throughout,
Yeah.
right?
Yes. Penny pinching.
I actually disagree with you when you say that everybody can be an entrepreneur. I think there's a special skill set that is required to be an entrepreneur. And चाहे वो छोटा business हो home based या वो when you venture backed businesses की बात कर रहे हैं, you have to have some form and shape of delusion within yourself. And being a delusional optimist kind of a human being, to have that self belief कि मैं किसी भी तरीके से कुछ भी एक प्रॉब्लम है जिसको और एक आइडेंटिफाई कर रही हूँ गैप को, उसको लेके आई कैन क्रिएट समथिंग आउट ऑफ इट. And I'll give an example of myself. When I had moved back, I really liked scones and I couldn't find scones in the market. So we started with this small home-based business where we were selling scones on weekends. And it was called Rolling Scones.
Oh, I love the name.
And it became really like over the weekends, I was making enough money to have. Us waqt to I was not doing around, I was just exploring opportunities within the market. But that opportunity and privilege to identify a gap within the market and say कि यार नहीं है market में, let's try it, let's jump in and take the risk. And learn as you go through that experience. But when you're determining to jump on an opportunity, I think there are three things that, in my opinion, you should look at. One is कि problem क्या solve करनी है, और problem से आप कितना identify करते हो. And I think that founder market fit is so important, especially in early stage markets or as a first time founder as well. Because if you don't relate to that problem, going that extra mile becomes very, very difficult, right? अगर आज मैं बैठ के मैं बोलूँ कि मैं agri-tech में जा रही हूँ, I have zero relationship or
Yeah.
understanding with Kisan or what problem to solve for them. I'm just a really bad fit. But the opportunity is still very large within Pakistani market, right?
Yeah.
So understanding that, and I think understanding your skill set is extremely important. And the third one is, how big is that problem? It could be, if especially for venture-backed businesses, if the problem is not as large as you think it is, then building for that or solving for that becomes very, very tough. because you will never be able to get the kind of returns that you're looking at. But as an entrepreneur, I personally feel you have to have some form and shape of delusion to go to solve that problem, because the journey is extremely hard. And if that delusion then leads to having low egos, being in the market, being in that business for the right reasons, and not being able to take any kind of offense. Like अगर आप हर छोटी छोटी बात पे offend हो
हाँ, वो
जाते हो,
तो, yeah.
तो आप business नहीं बना सकते, because इतना ज़्यादा, it's a very very tough journey. So if anybody is looking into getting into entrepreneurship, just have that self reflection of why you want to get into and who you are as a person, because your values will then lead to creating the business, attracting the right kind of people, etc etc. But having that self reflection is extremely important, because अगर आप अपने ऊपर नहीं believe करते और इतना बड़ा belief नहीं है आपके ऊपर अपने आप पर, you cannot go sell that business to anybody or build a team or build a business around it.
No, makes a lot of sense. So, speaking of delusion, Maha, as someone who's building a ride-hailing business, and so I remember like
That's
Maha,
the best segue.
Maha and I, like we first spoke about the BusCaro. I don't know if she had the name back then, but she spoke about like I'm gonna build a ride-hailing thing, and this is 2021.
2022.
2022? No, I think it was 2021.
You were still at Swivel in 2021, right?
Yeah. So 2022, early 2022, when fundraising winter was like right there.
Yeah.
And Maha was like, and the first thing I said was, so Maha, what's your other idea? But no, so what, in that conversation and later since, I've just realized that you really deeply care about this problem, right? And you saw it up close with Swivel as well. And that's why, regardless of the fact that paise bhi us waqt market mein kam the, vagara, and you still wanted to go ahead with it. So what was it? Like, why did you really want to, like, go ahead with ride hailing when everyone was telling you कि नहीं करो इस वक्त?
So I think Kalsoom and Halima both like covered some of these things, right? And one of them is obviously you have to be delusional, or in my case, completely dimag kharab hona chahiye. And the other is I think you have to really care about what you're building, mobility and those complications or not, or else it gets really difficult, right? And like what really keeps you in there. For me, I didn't really choose to be an entrepreneur. I had no plans of being an entrepreneur. It was never a dream of mine. I used to wake up and go to work every day. I'd had a job, and one day I didn't. And I wanted that same job, and no one was going to hire me to do it. And I thought that work was just very important. And I think being so deep into this, I think my perspective was just different from everybody else's, right? Because it just felt to me like this is a solvable problem. Here's how you would solve it. FOMO or not. So
Yeah.
I just need to figure out a way to sort of do that and build enough traction where ultimately somebody does write me a check, right? And I think that was just my 2 cents on it. But I think if I had ever done anything else, I don't think I would have made it through.
Really? Why?
I don't think I would have cared enough, right? I think it takes 3 things to be an entrepreneur. And I think it takes this delusion that Halima talked about. I think you have to care about something deeply. And 3, I think you have to lose all respect for yourself, because that's what a fundraising journey looks like, right?
Yeah.
And for me, I was like at the peak of my career a week before that. At a startup that had just gotten listed on NASDAQ. And then suddenly I was this early stage founder knocking on people's doors for money.
Yeah.
And
And
I
at
was
a very
treated
bad
like an
time.
entirely different human being. And I think that for anything else, I just wouldn't have put up with that.
Yeah. So again, you have to really, truly care. One thing that I read about founders and the founder mindset was how pretty much all successful founders believe that the world is a malleable place. The world is going on without your startup, right? The day before you started, you have to truly believe that I can change people and I can make a place where people can now no longer live without it. Or a certain small segment of people can no longer live without it. No, but that's like you mentioned fundraising bit. This is something I want to explore a bit more, right? How did you guys manage to raise funds, all 3 of you, because you've raised funds as an investor, it's like you've gotten money from LPs, and you guys have raised funds as founders. So fundraising tips for anyone who's thinking about fundraising. Let's just start with that, right? So anyone thinking about fundraising.
Delusion.
But also, I think what she's saying, right? Like,
Yeah,
lose all respect.
Yeah,
Like,
100%.
you're not the most important person in this world. Whatever idea you had about yourself, it is going to get challenged. It is going to get rejected. You will lose sleep over it. At points, you will also stop believing in yourself as a human being.
Yeah.
And to navigate that is by far one of the toughest things to do.
Yeah.
But I think दो चीजें हैं. एक, no money is better than bad money. Keep that in mind when you're going down
100%.
fundraising. Identifying investors who are value aligned with you, because these आप long term सोचो, ये आपके partners हैं, आपके team members हैं. अगर आपकी वैल्यू अलाइन नहीं हो रही उस इन्वेस्टर से या उस टीम मेंबर से, वो कभी भी नहीं चलेगा.
Yeah.
सो कोई भी आपको पैसा दे रहा है, उसका ये मतलब नहीं है कि वो अच्छा, लाइक दैट्स अ गुड इन्वेस्टर टू हैव. सो कीपिंग दैट इन माइंड. Second thing is knowing why you're raising capital as well, right? Too much capital is also a pain. More money, more problems kind of a
Yeah, yeah.
situation. So knowing why you want to raise, how much you want to raise, छोटा है, बड़ा है, जो भी है, आप अपनी business के लिए raise कर रहे हो, cancel out all the noise, because that will make you a little bit more authentic. And authenticity in fundraising is extremely important.
Yeah.
Otherwise, अगर आप किसी और के basis पे या market क्या कह रही है उसके basis पे लेने जाओगे पैसे, वो वैसे ही इतनी मुश्किल journey और आपके लिए problem आएगी.
Yeah.
So Kalsoom, now you see founders from both aspects, right?
Yeah.
You've gone and you've raised money as well, and we can talk about LPs separately. But
It's similar though.
is it similar? And then in terms of the founders who come to you, how do you like, what do you feel like are the founders that you back, like, or at least shortlist? And which ones are the ones that you just immediately cut out? Like, what is it that stands out as a red flag immediately?
I think what Halima was just saying, it's like, do you believe in what you're building, right? It's
Yeah.
like, can you capture my imagination? And I think honestly, off the bat, if I don't think you're the founder from a founder market fit, right? If I don't think you're the founder that should be building this business, if I don't believe you, if you haven't captured my imagination, it's probably, I think Miss Ben and I, my partner Miss Ben and I are aligned very often. I think we feel really similarly where we just don't feel it from the founder. You also notice things like integrity, like you can judge a lot of that stuff often even from the first pitch. Do they know their business better than you, right? You can also tell if someone is like selling you something that doesn't really exist if you ask a few questions and it all falls apart, right? So that's an integrity issue.
Yeah.
All of those things are things that I think become important from a fundraising perspective. I think and that's the first call, right? And then you get into like, you do reference checks on the founders. You do spend more time together, right? Really see how much they've really kicked the tires. I think even from our own journey from a fundraising perspective, I mean, some of our investors didn't need any time to write us a check. Like they were believers right off the bat. They had heard about us or whatever. Their friend had invested in us. And then sometimes there's that, FOMO happens, right? And I think FOMO is a really big part of a fundraise process. It has been extremely difficult for all of us to generate FOMO in the current box fund landscape, right? Because no one's feeling any FOMO right now.
Like we're not missing
There's
out
like
on
no,
anything.
there's joy of missing out. There's JOMO right now. It's like, ooh, don't want to touch that one. But with what, when we were kind of in that height, and that was when we did our first close of the fund, it was in the height of everything. There was that element of not just FOMO, but like a feel of like momentum, right, that you're generating. And I think a lot of those investors came in. Later on, it really is about like, do they believe in you? Like, do they believe that you're the ones that are going to do this? And especially for all of us, right, in Pakistan, you're building, even from a fund perspective, all of us are first-time fund managers.
Yeah.
None of us are some of us are now raising our fund twos, but all of us, especially like when all of us were raising, we were all raising fund ones. There weren't significant exits in the market. They had to believe we had to capture their imagination just as much as founders have to capture ours. And not only that, we were competing all of us as fund managers were competing against each other too, which kind of sucks that is the situation, but we were competing for the same pool of resources. So they also had to believe that why should I put money in you versus someone else, right? And I think it's more interesting when we come to founders in this market because, no one is doing what Maha's doing, from what BusCaro is, right? Swivel is not there anymore. Obviously, Airlift changed what they were doing. with what Halima is doing, obviously there's a lot of people in fintech, but like specifically doing what she's doing, not a lot of people,
No one's doing
right?
Roscoe.
And so I think what's the cool thing about people building in Pakistan is oftentimes you are the first mover, which is helpful because you're not competing. And though there are some, companies in our portfolio that weren't, but at the same time, because you've been the first mover, you have to convince people that it can even happen to begin with, right?
Yeah.
And what if from Maha she was competing against, like if Swivel couldn't do it, why do you think you're going to be the one that does it, right? With Halima, as everyone's like, why do we need inclusive financial products? I mean, it's crazy to me that is the question, but that was a major question in fundraising, right? And I think that's often the question here. And then for people raising for Pakistan, it's what is the proof that Pakistani startups can actually be a success? Like that is a big question even right now, right? And can you be a purely Pakistani startup and
still be successful?
Still be successful. That's another big question that I don't have an answer to yet, but that's what we're seeing happen right now.
Yeah, and I think it's just about the fact that venture as a model requires you to be such a big company, right? To be able to get a meaningful exit given the amount of risk that you're taking over the portfolio. But how has this mindset of yours changed since you were running an accelerator for such a long time, way before any of the VC funds were here, right?
Yeah.
You were running and you were working with so many founders at that point. So how have you seen the founders change, or their ambition change as well, given that what was possible from when I2I was an accelerator that you were running to now? Like, and how have you changed?
I've
in that
changed a
process?
lot,
Yeah.
a lot. I mean, honestly, we've had this conversation before that I was like, if I could. The problem when you are a fund manager is it's not your money, right? And you're dealing with, and it's not only just not your money, it's other people's money, and it's also so many other considerations that go into your portfolio, how it gets constructed, at what point are you investing? Is this company number 5, which means you can be a little bit more lax? Is this the very end of your portfolio deployment, which means you don't have a lot of cash to deploy? It changes everything, right? And so there's so many different considerations versus when I ran an accelerator program, there's something that's very deeply expansive about it. It's you're only there to support founders. And if you can connect them, and the ideal is to connect them to investors and them to raise investment, right? And so for me, it was about the business, of course, but at the end of the day, it wasn't about, is this business going to make me money? It's about whether I was more on the founder side of it, which was like, how can I support and help this founder get to where they need to get to in order to raise whatever capital is necessary for their business. And I think the biggest myth that a lot of people need to understand is, number one, VC funding is not for everyone. And actually, VC funding isn't for most businesses. Yeah. And that doesn't mean that you're not a success if you don't raise VC funding, right? And I say this as a VC. I actually think there's a lot of businesses that I personally would love to invest in, but I wouldn't invest in as a fund manager, right? Because it wouldn't. Fund manager, yeah, because I also am mindful of the fact that if I invest that money, the expectation that I have in terms of that hockey stick style growth can break 90% of the companies that are out there and 90% of the types of companies that are in Pakistan, there's so many amazing revenue generating businesses that are going to be healthy, that when you invest VC money where the expectation is to grow so rapidly, grow in valuation, have some sort of liquidation event, to me, I've seen that toxic style of, it can become toxic, right? That pressure. And I've seen a lot of businesses globally break underneath that, right? And so I think for me personally, I've changed a lot in terms of having to segment, like when I look at something from a fund perspective, and then also because I still very much, Invest to Innovate and the accelerator that was built was very much is as me now building IDI Ventures with Misbah, right? And so there's elements of, what I did there, the DNA of like supporting founders and what we do after we invest that I've pulled into the fund. And then now as a fund manager, I can look at things a little bit more judiciously, maybe even as an investor. And so I definitely have a different angle of how I look at things more from a business standpoint than necessarily the founder standpoint. But I still wear my, if I'm not investing in this company, I still want to support them as much as I can, right? In terms of how can I be, if I really like the founder and I am not necessarily going to write a check, what can I do to be as supportive as possible? And that's still me wearing the residual hat of what I did before. Yeah. And that's important to me because I don't want people to think that just because I became an investor, I just stopped caring, which is not, that's not why I became part of this ecosystem 13 years ago.
Okay. So, Maha, since you recently, and you're also still raising as well, right?
Aren't we all always
Yeah,
raising?
everyone's always raising. Sorry. Yeah. So, how was your fundraising journey, and how did you go about it?
I treat it like a fish market.
Okay.
That's
Share
that's
more.
that's what I literally do. I think that I know that I'm going to get a lot more no's than
Yeah,
most founders
yeah.
do, and so that's fine. And if I still want to build, then I have to accept that. And so I assume a certain conversion rate,
Yeah.
which
What's your assumed
one
conversion rate?
percent.
1%.
Yeah.
1%
Yeah,
is
that's a healthy one.
1%
That's
is
one. How is that for the VCs?
Same, 1%.
Same 1%.
But that means
Yeah.
you have to make your funnel very big,
Yeah.
right?
exactly.
That's
Yeah.
the biggest thing.
so I know I'm getting 1 out of 100. I count the number of checks, average
Yeah.
check size. I assume that, and then I'm just go after 1,000 people, right? And I am prepared to just sit there and every 30 minutes have a new person tell me how I should actually be running my business, and so on and so forth. But I think that's been my approach, and I know you used to see me because we used to sit and work out of the same place at one point, and I would just be sitting there like all day. I work through different time zones, and so I'm basically on a 24-hour clock. I nap in between, and
The
I
other
think I
time
just
zone is the
become
investors are in the other time zone, and your business is in this time zone, right? Yeah.
yes. So I just plan for all time zones, and that's how I schedule my calls. And I'm just prepared to sit there and just get my butt kicked all day. And I do enough of that, and eventually I raise the money and I move on. And I
And then
think
how do you like make a list of all the investors? Okay, so one another question is, how do you decide that this is the right person to raise money from,
that's
or
step
even
two.
ask for money?
So that's step two, right? So I first just go after everyone, and there are times when I've gotten commitments, and twice I've gotten commitments when I've basically had no money in the bank, and I've had to say no.
And why
Because
would you
that's
say
when
no?
my due diligence starts, right? So first I go and I get these yeses. Once I've gotten them, I go and ask other investors, other founders. And if that person doesn't check out, I don't take the money, which I think in retrospect has been a really
Regrets.
difficult decision to make at the time, but like the right thing to do. But I think step one for me is just create this funnel, go after every Tom, Dick, and Harry. When people are willing to commit to you, I think a lot of investors you'll already know about, right? Because other founders have mentioned them and so on and so forth. And then with others, I do my DD. And
But
sometimes I'm
मना क्यों
like,
करना
this
पड़ता
is
है? किसी को
bad.
क्यों मना करोगे? Like, do you think कि क्योंकि वो like okay, I understand अगर आपको पास clarity नहीं है कि उसके source of funds क्या है. That's one thing. And
That's
then
one.
that I think
That's
that's
one,
one
and
big
that's
thing.
that's popped up a few times.
Yeah.
I think another one is I'll ask around, and another founder will tell me that they invested and then created different kinds of issues.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's just something that I then would rather not get involved with. I think it comes down to things I think that just come up by.
No?
I also think founder DD is a relatively newer concept in this ecosystem. शुरू में जब हम पैसे
Founder
raise
DD या investor DD?
founder doing
Founder
an
DD of
DD
investor.
on
Fine, yeah.
investors is a very relatively newer concept because of शुरू में I'm talking like 2018 2019 and also 2020 जब शुरू में पैसे रेज करने होते थे और कोई भी नहीं इन्वेस्ट करता था पाकिस्तान में जहाँ से भी चेक आता था हम ले लेते थे and then eventually you recognize क्या गलत decision था but you wouldn't know better. Now I think founder maturity is also coming. The fund manager maturity is also coming. So the investors आपकी cap table पे especially a bunch of investors in Pakistan are for first time fund managers as well, like you said, right? So उनकी भी थोड़ी सी maturity आ रही है कि यार bad money is not acceptable on cap tables.
हाँ, because वो आप long term के लिए acquire
Long
जाते
term
हो,
के लिए
yeah.
नहीं होते and I think pattern recognition भी हो रहा है कि किस तरीके का behavior would not be acceptable, what are the best practices. All of that, I think, as an ecosystem, we are also evolving. But this concept of founder doing due diligence on investors is also new, but very, very important as well, right? Like I wish we had
और
started
what's the best way to do it? किस तरह से अगर मैं
दूसरे
founder
founder
हूँ,
से बात कर
Yeah,
बस
talk to the
just-
founders in the portfolio of that investor, right? Ask them what they would say about the investor.
Yeah.
And I think that is
Yeah.
you mentioned it too. That's one of
and
the best.
what if it's a new investor that no one in Pakistan has raised money from?
I
Ask
mean,
the
Have they
LPs.
invested anywhere?
Okay.
LPs
Reach
पता
out
करो
on
कौन से
LinkedIn, cold message people. Honestly, like
Yeah.
founders are all I feel very open with each other
Yeah.
when it comes to that. And to your question earlier about how have founders changed, I actually think founders, as we talk about the ecosystem maturing, the average age of a founder of a startup in Pakistan has also it's become people are older in starting businesses. That might be
Yeah.
changing right now, just given the current environment in terms of people launching businesses. But in kind of that 2021, 2022, 2023 era, even, it's like you would see people with some professional experience, having worked at Swivel, like, you know, you were working in investment banking before, Kareem, obviously, like, but they had that level of maturity. And I think, not saying that if you're a first time founder and you're really young that you lack that maturity, but sometimes having kind of the knowledge underneath you gives you, first of all, the network to be able to ask around, but also in some ways gives you the confidence to say no. It kind of you're a little bit more seasoned, right? And that is one thing I've seen in this ecosystem, you know, having been part of it for so long, is you've seen that maturity definitely grow and that sophistication grow.
Because I remember when this whole thing like was at its peak, like 2020, a lot of people were like, a lot of older, more sophisticated people that I met who also had the privilege to go and become an entrepreneur. By privilege, I mean that they weren't like looking this as a source of how their house would run, right? How their kitchen would run. They had done enough of that or had the means to make their household like, you know, have enough income. They're like, नहीं ये तो बच्चों के लिए है, right? ये तो छोटे मतलब हम तो बहुत बुड्ढे हो गए. I was like, you are 42, you're not बहुत बुड्ढे. Like, you know, you can.
It depends who you ask.
Well, yeah. I also saw this TikTok where a bunch of Gen Zs were asked like, who
Yeah,
is
what's old? It's like if you're younger than 2000, I'm like, I graduated from high school in 2000.
Exactly, right. So that was a bit of a shock. But anyway, a lot of people felt that, and then that's when I first came across the research that best founders or most successful founders are in their 40s and across
Because they've
like.
gone through life, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And they have a better they have a better idea of what they want, and
Yes.
it's so hard to stick through something for 8-9 years unless you really enjoy it, right?
Yeah.
Like to Maha's point, like she wouldn't have done this like any other startup except for in the mobility space.
Yeah.
Okay, so Pakistan, right? All how do
Why
we
are
like
you
Pakistan?
laughing before you ask a question?
Because we all know, like, you know, it's a difficult place to build. Like, so entrepreneurship is hard anyway. Pakistan, I feel like, is an extreme sport, right? So what is the Pakistan tax on entrepreneurship? Like, how is it harder?
How much time do you have?
All the time in the world.
Do you want to go?
I mean, these guys obviously are on the front lines of it, right? I say this as an investor now, but also, I mean, where to begin, right? I mean, I think when it comes to just your everyday, like I was just thinking about recently, just like the restrictions on the internet, like VPN being blocked, all these things of like, you know, this platform being banned, all of that affected startups in Pakistan, right? And I think, and especially when you're in the logistics space, all of that, that is your day-to-day of building your business. And that is like all of these things that are happening from a macro front of, you know, decisions that are being made top down that actually dramatically impact founders and what they're trying to build. Obviously, you have infrastructure issues, which we talk about, even the internet limitations and stuff like that happened recently that impacted. And, you know, we're coming out with a study, the sister company, and we talk about that quite a lot. Then it's the regulations, right? From a regulatory environment, Pakistan has made some changes, which is good, but there hasn't been anything dramatic in the last 2 years that has really made the enabling environment for businesses better. The tax regime is still very onerous for businesses building, right? The repatriation of funds is still a big question mark. What happens if a company exits? Like I mean, I'm smiling at you, Mubariz, because this is something that you think about probably on a day in and day out basis. We still don't have like really concrete answers, but you know, when we've seen before that when the enabling environment has been better, right? Like when State Bank allowed for founders to set up holdcos. That was actually a game-changing legislation that was like 2021, right?
Yeah, early 2021.
Which then, you know, happened at the same time as this huge amount of money that was coming in, but that really allowed things to be a lot easier for international investors to put money into Pakistan. Then you have like just the general, I mean, I think the thing is it's like 9 out of 10 businesses anyway, wherever you are in the world are going to fail. But I think the challenge with building in Pakistan are all of these overall limitations that I think create, the ceiling in the environment that just make it really, really hard. Even when it comes to addressable market, right? It's like Pakistan has, I was so exhausted by that heyday of 2021, 2022 of every white investor saying, fifth largest market in the world, 2/3 of the country under 30 was the same freaking statistic that everyone said over and over again. But I was like, is the addressable market that much? No.
Not even close to
Not
it,
even
right?
close,
Yeah.
right? What do we need in order for the addressable market to become larger? A lot of these infrastructure changes, like things in terms of like data becoming cheaper, all of that stuff needs to change if we want to see the environment open up even more. And I think the challenge is from a macro political standpoint, there's been so much instability in the last 2 years. And, maybe hopefully things are getting better now, but we've seen so much change that it hasn't, first of all, from a perception perspective, has changed market perceptions. But then even from like a continuity perspective has made things much harder to get things done because someone who was in power before, there's someone else that's new that we then have to deal with and have to speak to. And so, yeah.
So, Halima, what are your thoughts on what Kaz just said? Well, you can laugh first and then you can share your thoughts.
I actually disagree with the macro challenges that you're talking about being the sole hindrance. I do believe that it has to go hand in hand. No market was ripe for tech ecosystems to take off right off the bat, because when you start building in a market, you start recognizing what those challenges are, and you need partners like the regulatory frameworks to change, and founders to also push for those changes to happen. Because if you don't know what challenges are coming your way, you will never be able to solve for them. And I think SECP does a really great job in, at least in the fintech space, to be able to be open to new ideas to come through as well.
100%. By the way, SECP for me, in terms of startups, is probably the most progressive regulator.
100%.
State Bank, in some ways, has been in the past, not
Yeah.
anymore.
Not anymore.
FBR is by far the worst.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's the given.
Yeah, but I think jab tak enough founders are not raising their hands and saying कि हमें ये change चाहिए और हमारे businesses hamper होंगे अगर ये regulatory changes नहीं आएंगे, change is not going to come through.
Yeah. I don't think we're saying different things, by the way. Like for me, I don't think macro is the only hindrance. I think the problem is it's not, the ecosystem isn't binary, right? Like just because macro is bad, like doesn't mean that something else can't happen. I think any ecosystem, the definition of it is that you have a lot of levers that are all kind of moving at like different paces. But ultimately, the reason why in 2021 we saw major regulatory change happen at the same time that a lot of liquidity was high globally, interest rates were low. There was just this confluence of factors that happened where we had founders that were coming in that were much more sophisticated, building in for very large market opportunities. All of that happened kind of at the same time, right? It was like this really interesting period. Whereas now, like we have some regulators, like you mentioned, that are very amenable to change, are really open to it. But we also have blockers, right? We have regulators that are blockers to that change. We have some from a macro standpoint, when we think about the uncertainty, that impacts market perception, which then impacts investors wanting to put money in. Also, interest rates, maybe they're going a little bit lower right now, but generally are much higher than when in 2021 people were putting out money, right? And so I'm just saying that it's never that one equals this, right? It's very much like multiple things are happening at the same time in order for an ecosystem to do well. And I think that when we see some of the most innovative ecosystems in the world, you typically have the combination of multiple factors, but top down coming up at the same time as bottom up, right? You have really good founders that are building. Like, let's think about some of the most South Korea is one of the most innovative ecosystems in the world, right? It constantly makes the list. Top down, I mean, maybe not now with the current government, but past government, right? Top down was a huge amount of push. And then bottom up, you're seeing amazing amounts of, from an ecosystem perspective, support players, entrepreneurs, like all of that all happening at the same time that then came together to really see an ecosystem that then flourishes. Here, I think a lot of founders are constantly, we've had times where it's been a lot easier for sure, But right now, like what you guys are building is like really kind of against the grain. The amount of times that you have to go, and I know this personally, is like you have to go sit in an office in Islamabad in order to get things to even move.
Yeah.
You shouldn't have to do
Yeah.
that. Think about the amount of time that's lost.
But if I
and-
don't care enough to build that business, the repercussions are much larger as well, right?
For
like
sure.
if I say, okay, no, it's too, as an entrepreneur, my job is not just only to build the business that I'm building, but also change the needle. So that it's slightly easier for people following our journeys to go and build better businesses, maybe. But if we stop caring today, Pakistan is not going anywhere. And I think for me, that
Huh.
becomes, it's a chicken and egg problem.
It's chicken and egg.
But so you guys are talking about the regulation, right? You're not in the regulated space as such. Like your business gets affected more by infrastructure, right? Or is that not a correct assumption?
No, I mean, so we're also, just to talk about what Halima just said, that it makes it easier for the next person. Kareem and Uber should have made my life easier, right?
Yeah.
But
Airlift and Swift
we're
as well.
lakir ke fakir. And so my second biggest cost right now after technology is taxation, right? In my business today.
The services tax?
I am taxed 40% on my GMV,
14.
40% on my revenue.
40.
I am taxed 40% on my revenue
How?
because we created a tax for ride hailing.
Oh yeah.
And now the ride hailing tax, right, is what's applied to all mobility businesses. But I'm not ride hailing
you're
and I don't have a take rate, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm taxed on my GMV. That's at a 10%, that's 40% of my margin. So I spend right now, after I think my time spent on fundraising, I spend most of my time just sort of like fighting this battle,
And
right?
advocating for
and-
yourself
and trying
and for
to-
other players, right?
And so that's where my time is going. And so I do think these challenges are still there, and I think that you can have similar companies in the same space, and
Yeah.
that doesn't necessarily solve for all of us. But I think it's also just, I don't think it's done deliberately. I think there's just not enough education around these things, right? And I think that we're still so new in this that we don't really know what to do with startups as a country. And I think
Yeah, any new business model is just like
we have enough successes, and I think this is going to start to change. We're just not there yet. But to go back to what Halima said, I think we all signed up to be entrepreneurs in this market. We knew what we were signing up for, and I think this is just part of our day-to-day jobs. We've accepted that and just kind of gotten on with life.
Yeah, I think there's more acceptance than anything because देखो entrepreneurship दुनिया भर में होती है हर जगह जाके no entrepreneur feels it's their duty now to fix the system as well for the next person.
But what
because
is the alternative? What would the alternative?
typically
That you
the
go and,
system
like,
is
leave this market and go build somewhere
I
else,
mean,
right?
that's a whole different ballgame, right? So, for example, if SECP was not as forthcoming, there was no way a lot of businesses could have happened right now in
Yeah.
Pakistan. A lot of the fintech businesses, etc., I don't think they just would have happened at all.
Yeah.
I had this conversation with, and we'll do that, release that episode later, जहाँ पे हम small manufacturing businesses की बात कर रहे थे. And they were like, सबसे पहले, before being a manufacturing business, you have to be a power generation company. Every single manufacturing business has to be a power generation company first. Then they have to be a security company. Then they have to. So they're like, the overhead is so much before you come to your actual business just to be able to get it off the ground. But that's the difference between having a technology business because you at least do not have to, like, you're not in the manufacturing sector as such. But you're saying, like, how much does infrastructure, like actual infrastructure, affect a business like yours? Because your product is still out on the road, right? Or your service is still out on the road.
It doesn't, right? I think it's still just business as usual in this country.
Okay.
I think that's just what it was when we started out. I think, look, I think everybody sitting here right now has made a choice to be building something in this country. And I think that comes with a certain set of challenges which are different than other markets. And I think we all accepted that and just, for me, like, got on with it.
Yeah, okay.
कोई तो precedent set करेगा ना.
Someone has to start, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just
Like, it
that
just
in
sucks.
2024,
Like,
you're
it
setting
sucks.
precedents that were set in
Yeah.
other markets in like
Yeah.
20 years ago,
You get a
right?
pat on the back for being. Good job for doing it. Good job.
I don't think it's about pat on the back. I think it's about how deeply do you care for this problem to solve,
Yeah.
which could move the needle on a much larger scale that you're willing to take on these challenges that come part and parcel of it. Yes, it might slightly be easier to build in another market, but you also have to recognize that you might not have a deep understanding of the customer
Yeah.
or the regulatory challenge. You're not from the market. Like, at least आप यहाँ पर first class citizen तो हो. In any other market, you are a second class or even a third class, especially with a Pakistani passport. You are a third class citizen.
In
So
other
you are
markets, yeah.
sitting in your home country. You have some privilege here. Maybe it is 100% harder, and as a woman, it's much harder.
Okay.
And but somebody has to move the needle, and we make this choice to move that needle.
I think, and that risk reward is so much higher, right? The risk is really high, but ideally, if you can succeed, the reward is so much higher, right?
Yeah,
In terms of what it's also why I feel have always been, and I'm someone who a lot of people have asked me, they're like, why don't you just invest in the US, right? That's where you are, that you are American as well. Like, and I just honestly don't, I mean, no offense, but I don't think the problems that are oftentimes being solved are the ones I think are the most important, right? Versus I think here, every single problem that a founder is solving to me are like major problems that exist. And I think with emerging markets, generally, I just feel much more passionate about what founders are building here because they're often the first, but also the impact that they're going to have is so much bigger than if someone can deliver pizza 30 seconds faster, right? Which people also are doing here too. But
Yeah.
but those are not the businesses that I feel passionately about investing in. For me, it's about solving these real problems that exist for the population, the big part of the population, right? Which I think you can solve first world problems for the privileged class in this country, and that's great. That's fine. But I'm just saying that there's mass amounts of people that need transit solutions, right? There's so many women that don't have a bank account, but they do have an Iran account, right?
Yeah, savings
So
account.
all of every single business I can think of right now that where I really admire the founders are building in that similar way.
Okay. But one thing I want to come back to what Halima mentioned was so how is Pakistan extra hard for women? So like I think globally what we've seen is that even in the venture financing space, women underrepresented, in the startup space, women underrepresented. But what are the challenges for women that are more unique to Pakistan that you won't find in most other places?
I think fundraising is harder, and I think globally fundraising for women is hard. What I found as a woman leader, one of the challenges was team building. Women in leadership positions are not necessarily taken very seriously. So when we were first putting the team together, the common comment that I would hear was, "हम आपको help कर देते हैं आपके business में आगे, but हम full time job नहीं लेंगे." तो वो
Okay.
like help करना बहुत like it's very I think उनके लिए charity
It's like a bichari complex.
Bichari
Yeah.
complex. So building teams. I'm also in a space which has been predominantly male operated. Finance is largely like a man would understand finances or math.
But
better than-
your users are mostly women, right?
My users are mostly women, but when you're going and talking to the bank for partnerships or the regulator for some changes in the policy, initially it was like हम बेचारी को सुन लेते हैं, उसको टेबल पे बिठा देते हैं, but nothing concrete would come out of it. So pushing for collaborations, pushing for changes within the policy were just much more difficult because of my gender. And also because there was not a lot of precedents that were set beforehand, right?
Yeah.
At least in the fintech space, venture, we were the first women who went out to raise the kind of capital that we raised. It was always like, "Acha, pehle to kisi ne nahi kara hua yahan par." So that just becomes a lot more tough. I think team building and just getting somebody to take you seriously is much harder in this market.
Yeah. So Maha, what was your experience like? You
What's the
in this market?
question?
Okay. Like so Halima was talking about how like the market has been harder for women, like especially in Pakistan, even in terms of hiring, in terms of raising capital, in terms of partnerships. Did you like, and you're in the mobility spaces where I think there's like no women, at all, like especially for like people operating mobility related services, right?
Yeah, so I think two things. One is I think by the time I got to BusCaro, honestly, I didn't face much of this because I've in some way been doing this very job for many, many, many years at this point, and I've just sort of gone through that journey, right? That being said, I, I, s- I think across the board, I go into a meeting and people cannot seem to take me seriously. There'll be somebody from my team who's much junior than I am. They'll talk to them. They'll look at that person. That person then looks to me and says, Maha, can you give an approval on this? And I'm like, okay. And then they like, will communicate that to another person. And this is still very normal. I think with fundraising, honestly, it's hard for men and women right now. So I don't think, at least openly, I've faced much discrimination there. Ironically, in Pakistan, um,
But what about not in Pakistan?
but that's what I was going to get to, right? And I think I've never really thought about being a woman or being a woman entrepreneur. I think I've always just been told this isn't a space I'm supposed to operate in, and I've just disagreed and gotten on with it. But I think what I've just gone through an experience, which I think Halima and Kalsoom know about, where I was on a global platform openly discriminated against, and it was very openly because I'm a woman, right? And I've been thinking about that a lot, and I realized that we've trained people not to do it openly,
Openly, yeah. You can just
right?
do
But
it
when
secretly.
someone is successful enough or powerful enough to still do that and get away with it, they still do, right? Which is the experience that I've just had. So I think it's a global
No, of
problem. I
course,
don't
yeah.
think it's just in Pakistan. Like if I think back to my last job in the US, I remember my boss used to refer to me as the girl, right? There were like 4 managers reporting into him, and he'd take all of their names and be like, oh, is it the girl's shift? And I was just the girl. I didn't seem to have a
Wow.
name. So we talk about this being this thing in Pakistan, but if we look at like fundraising globally, if we look at how women are treated all over the world, I don't think it's that much.
I don't think so.
Different
I don't
either?
think it's
Yeah.
that different. And I think I've only just realized that, right? And I was on this TV show recently. And all of the comments that I got were around by this one judge, my lack of confidence, how I look underconfident, how I seem aggressive, right?
So you're both underconfident
Confident
I'm
and
and
that's what I'm saying,
aggressive?
like,
underconfident
that's
and
a
I'm aggressive, right? And I think with the men, they were confident and not aggressive, apparently, right? And so I've only recently just been thinking a lot about this, and I think for me, I've just concluded it is what it is, and I think it's across the board. Um, what I do think is changing, though, is I think a lot of it is from people just having had this assumption about women. And I think as they work with women and they come across women, that changes.
yeah, of
Um,
course.
and I think I've worked with, great men over the years who just assumed I couldn't do my job. And once they realized that I could, they treated me very differently, right? And then they treated the next woman very differently. And so I think that transition is happening. And I think we're all playing a small role in at least making that happen.
No, but so before we come on to the whole like what needs to change, like so how did you guys deal with it? So say you're sitting in the meeting that you spoke about, and the person is just talking to like the person who's junior to you. How do you deal in those situations? Like, what do you do? What's an actionable advice that you would give to someone in that situation?
I think when people openly, so in my case, I get a lot of open comments like, "ये औरतों का काम नहीं है, आप कहाँ से करेंगी?"
Okay,
Uh,
it's very as clear as it can be. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
That's not underhanded. It's
Yeah,
just
it's
like,
like right there.
ये खवातीन का काम नहीं है, आप बसें कहाँ से चलाएंगी? I think now I'm in a position where I give them a reality check and I'm like, मैं 1,000 बसों के करीब चला रही हूँ, तो मैं
Huh, there you
आपकी
go. Yeah,
20 भी चला ही लूँगी,
yeah.
right? But I think getting to that point where I could make that statement, I think that was a lot harder.
Okay.
Um,
What would you say in the beginning when you did not have 1,000 buses?
But I was like the ex-country head for Swivel, right?
Yeah.
And before that, I was at Kareem, and I've been in mobility for a very long time. But I remember even when I was trying to get this job at Swivel, um, I I went in and sort of like was trying to make my case for this job, and I was told, okay, I think you're really smart, but this isn't really for women, right? Like, why do you also want to put yourself through this?
Yeah.
And I think it came from I don't even think it came from a sexist place. I think it came from a general,
That's
concern.
a curious.
And so I think, there's been a lot of that. And I think convincing people to know, I'm sure this is what I want to do.
I think at one point you also start like that delusion kicks in and be like, I'm gonna prove this person.
Oh,
wrong."
100%.
Yeah.
I'm a new mom right now, and the word in market is that her priorities have changed.
Seriously?
अब मैं business नहीं बना सकती because मेरा बच्चा हो गया है.
Yeah.
But it's also probably why. Sorry, finish what you're saying first.
But for me now, the business is in a much better place now, and I have a bigger drive to prove a point than ever before.
Yeah.
Like my sure things, my life has drastically changed, but that doesn't mean my drive to solve a problem that I believed in 5 years ago has changed as well.
I'll also say, and hopefully I can share this. I'm just going to share it, and then.
Yeah.
But I mean, when Halima just had her baby, which is just a few months ago, we had to, as an investor, had to say like, you can take more time off if you need to, right? But I think, and I had the same situation when I had my daughter as well. I felt internal pressure to prove that my priorities haven't changed, right? And so there's also this balance that you play of like, proving people wrong, but almost preempting. And even though she did come back so early, like she was coming to a meeting when she was like, just like, it was like a week out or 10 days out. And she was like, Miss met her at a conference room and we were like, why are you here? But it's, and that is Halima and her personality. Like she would do that anyway. I was checking in like, 3 weeks into, post having a kid. But at the same time, like you shouldn't have to. And I think that is like the challenge that women everywhere face. It's like this need, even if it's internalized and it's no one even telling us, right? No one was probably even saying to her priorities have shifted, but she internalized it and was like, I'm just going to go out and be there and all of that. And it's like, but guys don't have to do that.
Yeah, that's true.
I was
Guys
like,
don't have
there's
to do a lot
no
of stuff.
sense
Yeah,
of
yeah.
like when a man's wife has a baby and, that there is any sense that his priorities have changed. But there's no question about it, right? And I think for women who are ambitious, we need to almost prove that our ambition has not changed
Or diminished.
or diminished,
Yeah.
just because we are also now mothers, because we can wear multiple hats. We have been doing that our whole lives anyway. But I find that to be crazy that that's what people would be saying to you, because I can literally just like go tell every single person how she's been behaving since. And I was like, more just like, take more time off. Why are you back?
I was just talking to Halima about this outside, and even getting married. I got
Yeah.
married last year, as all of you know. And for my husband, I feel like people started to take him more seriously. It's a sign of maturity, right? And it's a sign that he's like settled in life, and that's supposed to make him better at his job. And I think for me that worked in reverse, where there was,
Okay.
I think I've had, just there was a lot of fear around what does this mean for BusCaro and what does this mean
Yeah.
for me? And am I still going to be the same entrepreneur? And I think those were questions that came up in the team. Those were questions that came up in not so many words from some of our investors, ecosystem in general. And I got married on a Sunday. You were there. I made it a point to go to work on Monday. And
But
I
also,
feel like
should you have done that?
Yeah.
that was the
I-
one day that I felt like it was most important for me to show up to work, just to be like, hey guys, I'm still here. Things are okay. Don't worry about it. Right.
And it would be great to get to a world where you wouldn't feel the need to do that, where you wouldn't feel the need to come back early. I didn't feel the need to come back early. I was the same, by the way. After I got married, a lot of people asked me that same question. Like, oh, like, are you still going to be doing this? I'm like, why would I stop
Yeah.
building what I'm building just because I happened to get married? Like, they did not ask my husband that, right? And so it's just interesting. Like, I would love to be in a world where that's not even a question. Like, if anything, it would be a question if you stopped doing what you were doing. But we're not in that world, right?
But
like
would
that
you,
is.
what would you change about that mindset, right? Because, okay, we've all seen every Women's Day all the banks, all the big corporates would have
Lots of pink.
lots of pink, but a lot of guys on a stage with like two women cutting a cake with like pink ribbons around them.
One woman. If they're lucky.
And they would have banks would have those cards that would be pink for women, or would have a shopping bag, etc. So I mean, a lot of that seems like, okay, just if I was a bit more generous, I think it's coming from a place where they want to do something. I feel like a lot of people just don't know what needs to be done. And from what it sounds like, a lot that they can do is just stop like treating women so much differently than they currently
Yeah,
do,
I think
right?
stop putting, it's like the movie Dirty Dancing. Don't put baby in a corner. Don't put women in a box, in a corner, whatever, right? Stop putting putting silos around like why should women only be celebrated on Women's Day? Like, I mean, I
Yeah.
think it's great that we have a Women's Day, so I'm not like advocating against it, but I think at the end of the day, right, it's like, why are you only celebrating
Yeah.
women that day? Like, instead of that, like, open your minds about, like, we think about this a lot now, in terms of, you know, how we can help our companies be more inclusive in their hiring, right? That doesn't necessarily mean just gender. It can be class. It can be a number of other things. But how can you do that on a regular basis? How can you be more open and inclusive? And how can we make sure that there's, you know, every time you have a panel, it's not just men that's there, right? But then also at the same time, don't just have women as a token situation.
because I've
right?
seen
We
that
have this balance.
Moderators hoti hain.
Yeah, or the amount of times I've been asked to be a moderator, I'm like, seriously?
Listen, as a man, I always get asked to be a moderator.
I mean, you're also a great moderator, and I'm also a good moderator, but that does not mean we should only be moderators.
Yeah.
But you know, the whole point here is that it's not just a one day thing, right? It's actually saying, and it's going beyond just a top level, like this is what you need to do. Everything needs to be like, you know, pink and a celebration, whatever. It's like actually having very serious conversations with yourself and really examining your own biases, because women have it too. Like the amount of, we talk about this from an investment perspective. You know, we always say that you would assume that women investors are not sexist. But we've been brought up in the same society as everyone else. There's a lot of internalized misogyny that
Yeah,
exists.
yeah.
Like you have to audit yourself. You have to say, like, am I being as inclusive as I should be, as I can be, right? And if I can't have that hard conversation with myself, how can I expect you to have that hard conversation? And it's these really uncomfortable conversations, and people are not good with discomfort. So it's actually saying I'm not calling a guy sexist just because he had a mantle, but I want to have a conversation. I'm not trying to cancel anybody. And I think cancel culture in my mind is counterproductive because it freezes people in time. It doesn't allow people to evolve. But instead, can we have like a real conversation where tell me when the last time is that you really thought about is your, beyond the fact that you have XYZ people hired in your company, is your environment inclusive?
Exactly.
Does it
yeah.
have like bathrooms? Is your office in a place that is easy to get to from a female perspective, right?
Yeah.
Are your hours really late that it's going to be difficult for them to stay? Do you have daycares potentially in your office if you have a lot of women that are potential moms? Like, why do so many women drop out of the workforce when they have children? Because a lot of these environments are not flexible. So there's so many things that you need to examine for yourself to first ask yourself. You're not saying, am I sexist or not? Is there, you know, am I a misogynistic workplace? You're not asking that question. You're actually saying, like, am I creating an environment that is as inclusive as it can be? And where do I stand and how can it be better?
I'm going to get myself into a lot of trouble now.
Aren't we all?
Look, just as an entrepreneur, and I'm constantly told I don't hire enough women. I have a very male-centric team, so on and so forth. I think at the end of the day, I've literally built a business that's there trying to solve for women in some way. That being said, I feel like as an entrepreneur, my job is to build this business. And
Yeah.
I have limited budgets, right? I can't afford to have daycare. I can't afford to have the luxury of people not being available to work at night, something that men are willing to do. I don't have the luxury of people not working the weekends. I don't have a lot of luxuries that I should be giving women. I just don't have the capital for that. And frankly, even if I did to some degree, I do feel like at the end of the day, I have to hire the best person for the job.
100%.
And now the issue that I think I face is that men generally just have more exposure and therefore end up being better in that role, right?
Mhm.
Because the guy applying for that job has done something very similar for many, many years. And there's a woman applying for that position with no experience, wanting a higher pay, wanting better hours, wanting, you know, this, that. And I've taken capital from people and have a responsibility to spend that as efficiently as possible. And so if you look at my organization, there's practically no women. And I'd love to have them there, but at what cost?
Mhm.
No, I get it. And that's why
I
I
think
think
that's
the
a really good point.
public infrastructure has also failed Pakistani
Mhm.
businesses, right? Like when you spoke about accessibility, it's just that I think most of the world is not as safe for women as it is for men, generally. I think that's the case in New York as well. But Pakistan is a bit extra unsafe, right? You won't see women on, like, even walking on the street over here. Like, there's far less women in the workforce. So I understand why it's harder for small businesses to provide all sorts of amenities, but depending on, like, you, again, the fact that people asked you like कि ये तो औरतों का काम नहीं है, when you were building it as well, so that's also kind of reflection on how hard the space is for women to work in, right? But say, I think anyone operating in the services sector, so say like with Udan, I think Udan has a pretty good representation of women in their team, right?
But I think I would agree with her. I think at this point in this day and age, we need to be able to take away the gender and be like, competence ke liye hire karna hai na, business banana at the end of the day. Yes, you can, if you can afford to have inclusive work environments where you're having a daycare and all of that stuff, great. But I think mindset par bhi hota hai कि flexibility के लिए there's not much that as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, that you need to do much, right? Call centers हैं या associates हैं, if they need certain off hours in terms of working, have the ability to provide that. But at the end of the day, I would not hire for gender. I would hire for competence.
As you
And I think-
should,
yeah.
right? I think
Yeah.
I think
every
you're
business-
actually, but you're doing women a disservice if you
Yeah.
hire them just because they're women.
100%, 100%.
And I think it's that tricky balance because even as an investor, I mean, so many people automatically when they see Miss Bunai, they assume we only invest in
In
women
women,
and
yeah.
ladies.
Yeah.
But you know, that's not the case, right? We're a commercial fund and we have to invest in that. And so as much as I would love to have, you know, we have 30% of our companies are founded or co-founded by women. I would love that to be 60%. But it's like when you look at the pipeline, it's just not there. It's
Yeah.
like the amount of women-led companies that I see that are venture backable, that fit our portfolio mandate, that all, if you fit all of that, I'm not going to invest. It would be a disservice for me to invest in a female-led company
Just because
just because, right? It is also, it does us a disservice as women, female fund managers too, because
Yeah.
basically then it proves everybody right that, oh, you must be soft because you're women building a fund.
But
right?
if you look at the overall stats within the Pakistani market, like 20% तो पाकिस्तान औरतों की participation
है
है
labor workforce में, yeah,
workforce
so-
में, तो अगर आप बड़ा बिजनेस बनाने की बात कर रहे हैं तो उसमें अगर 20% पूरे country में urban participation है, how, where are you going to find those women? So having women check off as diversity like metrics is also wrong, and I think that does disservice.
Yeah, and I feel like सारी जो conversations, at least my conferences वगैरह में देख रहा हूँ, I think there's this, a lot of panels are forced.
Yeah,
I genuinely
yeah,
believe
yeah,
that, right?
yeah.
And I feel like that's not the point. The
Yeah.
point was always to include more women.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that every single panel that you do should have at least one woman in it. Like
yeah.
I
and a lot of it is tokenism as well now.
exactly,
It-
and that's what I see abroad. In a lot of conferences abroad, it's not the case. Like because they're truly inclusive, and they're like, okay, this is the best person to speak about this. Is the best person to speak about that, right?
But there are some panels where I'm like, did you even try?
Exactly.
Like,
I know
you
what you
didn't
mean,
even
yeah.
try to see
Yeah.
if there were
Yeah.
women in this
Yeah.
position, right? And sometimes I actually can list, honestly, more badass women than sometimes I can about guys, right? So I'm like, if you just ask, I'm sure you can find more. So you can tell there's that balance, right? Like you don't want women to be token on a panel at all. And at the same time, you need to at least make an effort to be, and I
Yeah.
call it being an activist in your own, like how you source, right? I say this even as an investor. You know, if I sat back and just passively allowed deal flow to come to me, it would be 99% men,
Yeah,
right?
of course.
That's just the nature of this industry. But if I want to really find, like, you know, female-led companies, all of that, I have to be much more activist and make the effort to go out there. Similar with some people who are building panels and all of that, sometimes you can tell that they didn't even try. And
Yeah.
so try.
So I've had this issue, right, with this. So every episode I try to do, say it's in a sector or it's in an industry, I try to find women. Sometimes I do find women in it, and they're just not. It's just not logistically possible for them to be available in Karachi or at the same date when everybody else is available, etc. So it just becomes an issue. And given there's so many more men, for each woman available, then we end up just going ahead with the episode, right? So that's
Did you hear
something.
that comment section? Stop. He's like trying to defend himself before.
No, I'm just sharing like a legit experience that I've had doing this, right? So this is my first time delving into building panels.
This may be
So-
a really naive thought, but I feel like we keep trying to create these women entrepreneurs and women in leadership positions. And I don't know why we can't just get women to start off at the same place that all these men started off as, and they'll earn their way, right? Why can't we just hire a lot more female interns who are 22 years old today, who 10 years from now will become those CEOs and founders, right? We keep talking about women entrepreneurs, but if you talk about your deal flow, I'm sure all of these men that came to you had X number of years of experience in startups, this, that. Why aren't we getting women to just do that and then send you that pitch deck?
No, but
I mean,
so,
right.
sometimes it's a confidence thing. So,
Yeah.
so when we talk about delusion,
Yeah.
it's not saying that, you guys are people that have pitched, right? So it's, present company excluded, but sometimes you're not as delusional as you should be to believe you can even be
Yeah.
in that same room,
Yeah.
right? There's a lot of, I had that even experience of like imposter syndrome, whereas, a lot of guys sometimes don't have that. And you're like, wow, you need a little bit of imposter syndrome, bro. Sometimes in that situation, but I think about it too of like the guys that, I meet so many solo female founders, right? And I think about this often because a lot of the women co-founded companies in our portfolio, they're married couples. And I feel like that
Yeah.
phenomenon is quite uniquely Pakistani, right? Or maybe it's uniquely part of our cultures. But when you think about it, a lot of the guys that have been male co-founders, a lot of them have met each other working in these environments, right? They've worked at Greem together. They went, the Truck It In guys built and launched something. Same with actually Deal Cart, right? They worked together elsewhere. If we're not putting women in these environments where they can serendipitously meet each other, work together, I think one exception is Sehed Kahani, where, Sarah and Ifat met each other actually where they were before. But oftentimes you're going to work with, people that you know really well, where that connection is there. And that's oftentimes we're seeing, married couples that are building businesses and really great ones at that, right? But at the same time, sometimes even as an investor, I find that to be a really interestingly unique Pakistani thing where, I have to assess the dynamics as a husband and
Yeah.
wife from a power perspective, from like even looking at their equity split perspective. Is this a token female founder? Who does what in this? Like, what if their marriage breaks up? There's a risk there, right? Of like,
Huge
where does
risk,
the
by the
business
way. Huge co-founder
right?
risk, yeah.
And so it's a different thing that you have to assess. But even to Maha's point of like, if we're encouraging women to constantly come into the workforce and then it's going to be more of a medium term thing. But ideally, like you start to see people then serendipitously start to build connections, meet each other. That could lay the foundation for maybe not the first business that you build, but maybe the second. And like you start to see that happen. But I personally don't see. And I've seen a lot of businesses over the years, right? But a lot of the female co-founded businesses, it's really rare that I see two women building a business together. Not rare, but it's not as common as you might see elsewhere.
Yeah, of course. There's a bunch of guys building. Almost every other company co-founders are all guys, right? Last thing on this is you've seen some specific projects or say initiatives to address this issue, right? So as eye to eye, both the accelerator and the fund, you have been part of both the We Raise and WeFi. What do you think? And then we have a bunch of accelerator programs for women, women in tech. There's Circle as well, which I think Sadaf does. So there's quite a few of those. What do you think What is the impact that these programs have had? Like, or do you think there's nothing material that has come out of
I
it?
think there's a lot of impact that they've had, right? And in terms of, and obviously there's bias there, right? The sister company that I founded has done work specifically supporting women. Right now, it's not just women through a program that we're doing with with Visa Foundation that's supporting it. But it's called IDI Scale, but like that's kind of taking some of the lessons from our past programs and implementing it here. I think that we've definitely seen, like, I think what we've seen, with the program that Nidha has been building with like Standard Chartered and like women in tech, like all of that, it definitely serves a really important purpose, right? Which is creating visibility, giving them a platform, giving them access. And then they then feed into other programs that are there. I think there's the balance of how do you support and uplift and give a platform to women-led companies, but also at the same time, don't silo them,
Yeah.
right? Don't put them in a corner and have them be, to what Maha was saying earlier, put them, our accelerators originally were always men and women. And like put them in the same environment and you'll oftentimes see like who will outperform each other, right? And I think that's really where you start to see it, where you don't kind of have it sequestered into its own thing and instead say that. And I think the challenge sometimes happens where, it becomes really, there are so many awards and competitions that exist just for women entrepreneurs. And I think the challenge then becomes is then you start to see people like winning award after award after award, but they're not building the business, right?
Yeah.
And so it's also the balance of like, you need the support, obviously. Ideally, if there is, in funding that comes along with it, even better. But how do you balance that with the very hard thing of like actually sitting down and saying that money is going to be in service to actually building the business and not in service to, whatever DFI, Development Finance Institution, or some embassies KPIs of like showcasing this, and we want you to retrofit your business to fit, XYZ. Like we want you to give hygiene stuff to women in what you're doing. That doesn't make you move forward in what you're building, right?
Yeah.
And so there's just this balance that I think is really important here. And I'm not anti women only programs. I think there's also an importance there because I think there are, when you have circles for women only, there are things that they'll share with each other that they may not share in a different type of environment. There is this feeling of they can be in an environment there where they may not feel comfortable joining something else. And at the same time, I do actually think when we've run accelerator programs in the past, even I've seen really amazing things happen when you just kind of let women just perform and do their thing.
I have a slightly different opinion on this. I think overall accelerators and incubators in Pakistan.
Yeah, let's just talk about them in general as well.
If
Like,
you
what do you feel about them?
don't have money attached to it, I don't think real output will come through because the struggles are going to be the same. Like, अगर पैसे ही नहीं है मेरे पास तो मैं
हाँ.
जाके क्या build करूँगी, right? Like I can get that training that is required to build great businesses online
Yeah.
as well now.
Mhm.
But if I don't have money attached to it, I'm not going to go and do that. The second thing is no true successes have also come out of these incubators and accelerators in Pakistan, especially. Not that I'm aware of.
I mean, depends on what you call a true success.
And also the role that the program had in getting them there. That's another question.
Yeah.
A lot of times accelerators, incubators, like I touch you and then you go raise money. And
You
I'm
came
like,
to my office
wow,
once.
big success,
Yeah.
right? Which,
Yeah.
yeah.
So अगर for example अगर आप venture backed businesses की बात कर रहे हो कौन से accelerators graduate होके large capital
हाँ,
raise
venture back
करा?
तो नहीं. But अभी मैं जैसे Shark Tank का देख रहा हूँ, right? A lot of them are
Before you
making-
go there, I just want to
Yeah.
quickly comment here, right? I think these accelerators are great and I think they should exist, but I also feel like because they're there now, we expect women must go through that. Like when I was fundraising, I was constantly told I shouldn't go to I2I. I should instead go through this We Raise program, right? And I kept getting nudged in that direction, and I'm like, but why? Like, why can't I just go to this fund?
Well, that
Just
was
like,
the only program that we were doing at the time, right? So
but why is it a necessity for a woman to have to go through that program? Why can't I just go to you as
raise.
eye to eye, like so many men who've had the same experiences I have prior to that, right? And I feel like we're constantly now pushed into that direction. I mean, it's great that they exist, but like also women shouldn't have to be a part of that now just because they're there, and we should be able to have the same access to funding out of the same pools as everyone else. And I think I find it a little bit offensive that I'm constantly told to go.
Depends on who
through
was
that.
telling you to do it, right? Was it someone whose job it is to encourage that program versus it's someone completely external telling you, listen, I think you need to go through this program? Like
All of the above.
all of them. Okay.
I mean, for the people running the program, I wasn't running the program, but I'm just saying that was the only program that was being run, right? That was existing to support.
Yeah, there was no
companies.
accelerator at that point.
There wasn't another accelerator. So that would have been why, not to defend, but just to say that that's probably why it was being pushed and because you were identified as a really amazing founder that should be in the program, right? But it wasn't because like we're pushing you towards that instead of something. There was no instead of. The past accelerators just didn't exist. Today, if you wanted to be part of IDI Scale, that is for men and women, right? So that would be what we'd push you towards. For other people outside of it, I don't know why or what they said, but yeah, that's what I can.
But okay, moving on to like our ecosystem in general, right? Accelerators, incubators, they play a big role and all. But overall, what do you feel like is our general receptivity to failure in Pakistan? This is something I ask everyone who's part of the venture ecosystem, because I feel like there's this underlying negativity which just waits for one news item to just like, there's so much,
Yeah.
bounce, and there's so much that comes, and I feel like it's definitely coming from a genuine place, right? They truly feel that. That's why they just speak at every single issue that happens, right?
I don't think
I don't think it's genuine.
I don't think it's genuine. I think we're waiting for everybody else to fail so that we can succeed. I think that's a general mindset within the Pakistani ecosystem, which is very, very unfortunate. We don't have enough failures, and because we don't have enough failures, we don't have enough learnings so that we can make successful businesses as well. I think failure is extremely important in ecosystems like ours so that we can learn about it. Whatever companies have not been able to succeed, we have never as founders heard their learnings, which is the unfortunate part. You have आपके पास इतना बड़ा प्लेटफॉर्म था कि आप उस फेलियर को एक अपॉर्चुनिटी ऑफ learnings for other founders बना सकते थे. आपने उसको completely negative limelight में लाके you just created this entire
Like a stigma around it. Like you
it's a
can't. No one
stigma
feels
around it.
comfortable talking about their
And
learnings,
you
right?
spread so much rumors, you ruin the talent, you risk appetite आपने लोगों का कम कर दिया just because one company or two company or five companies failed. But as founders, as company builders, we couldn't find कि अच्छा उनने क्या गलत करा जो हम नहीं कर सकते. And this is, I think, very unfortunate in a market like Pakistan because failures will happen.
But I think we're also illiterate. Like, I don't think Pakistanis understand that most startups fail and some startups will fail.
And
right?
also, most startups don't fail because of fraud.
Yeah,
that
or
too,
like
right?
gross incompetence.
Or any failure is fraud related.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah.
I think everyone jumps to that, right? And I think it becomes more exacerbated because of what you said, that founders who did fail, don't openly speak about why it happened. And I think, to speak about the mindset, it's a scarcity mindset, right? It's
Yeah.
this idea that all of us can't succeed, only one of us can succeed. And it is so unfortunate when you think about it.
But that's
right?
also on the founders. I was one, because we were talking about token moderators. And so I was moderating this panel recently where there were a few founders who had businesses that hadn't worked out. And I was really excited about it because I thought I could ask all these great questions and we'd all learn so much. And I think for 20 minutes, I kept repeating myself and I couldn't get anything out of anyone because I think people are so uncomfortable also just talking about their failures, right? Or just any learning that they've had, which I think can go such a long way for anyone else who is building right now. So I think there's that. And I think we as a nation just are obsessed with fraud, and that has to be the only reason something fails. And also this expectation that all startups are supposed to succeed. Like they took money and now they must succeed.
I think that's just comes down to the fact that a lot of people don't understand venture well enough. They don't understand how venture capital is supposed to work. And what's the most unfortunate thing about Pakistan is that venture is the only source of investment here, like
is
institutional
actually,
investment
yeah.
here. And coming back to what I said about Shark Tank was that when we see a lot of companies that were incubated in the Pakistani incubators and accelerators, they're getting money on Shark Tank because as businesses, they're fine.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what the majority of businesses in any market would be your small, non-venture, conventional space businesses that are not, say, creating a new category or changing consumer behavior, etc. Right. I think it's a combination of both. But what is it that you feel that people could be doing differently, right? In terms of, say, sharing learnings, like how I know I2I does a lot of reports, especially the startup ecosystem report, which has just come out. It's they share a lot around generally fundraise, but what about other learnings? And are people receptive to sharing those with you? Say,
Yeah, I think people are receptive to sharing challenges for sure. Whether or not we've spoken to people specifically about why a company shut down is different, right? Because I think it's a lot of companies are shutting down. We also just don't know about it, right? There have
Yeah.
been companies shutting down that just aren't sharing that they're doing it. I think it's hard to say that the next thing that needs to happen is that everyone should go to their LinkedIn and talk about really openly why they failed or what's going on here. But we've talked about this. It's like, can we create small environments where it feels like like a private way of sharing, at least, we talked, what was that, what we were talking about, like these failure situations.
Step nice.
Yeah.
Halima wanted to do
Yeah.
those, right? But creating these like small little environments where it's not a ton of people, you're not opening yourself up to a lot of judgment, but that does create an environment where founders can actually learn from one another and share with from one another. And maybe in doing so, loosens things up a little bit. So then maybe it's a bigger next time. It's even bigger next time. And so I think the challenge is that it's such an elbows up scarcity environment, right? They're like, if we have one success story, that means I'm not going to succeed, versus any ecosystem that's successful in the world has had so many success stories, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, we haven't had any yet, really. When you think about like
Yeah, in the recent
I mean, yes, sure. There is like the SadaPay acquisition that just happened, and we can deem that a net positive.
I've heard
Success
so
story.
much. Like I wrote a little post about explaining just what the transaction
know.
is. And
And it was a great post, by the way. 'cause
but
it
so many people reached out saying, no, it's such a big failure. And I was like, I just explained, like, it's
Why
still, the
it's
jury's still out. Like, yeah,
exactly. And so that's the thing. It's like, even when something is a relative success story in terms of, a large regional fintech coming in, acquiring us, that's a great example, a great story
Yeah.
for everybody. And nobody saw it that way. Everybody wanted to get into the minute details of how much did an investor actually make off this deal to deem it whether or not it was a success. And so I think we have all these armchair experts in the ecosystem that are oftentimes not building the hardest businesses, or not even building businesses at all. And
Yeah.
they'll just sit back and just judge everybody else, and it makes them feel better about themselves, when they will always exist, right? When we talk about trolls that exist everywhere, I'm sure even in the comment section for this video that we're doing right now, right? It is so much easier to be a keyboard warrior that will go on and like say all these things that are really hard. I'm like, okay, then you go out and build this, right?
Yeah.
You go out and do
Yeah.
this for
I feel like most criticism comes from people who feel that all these startups took money that was supposed to come to me, or should have come to a business like mine. Instead, they went to look this business that failed, and that's probably because the investor is an idiot and the startup was a fraud, right? This is the general theme of most things that I've heard. But what do you guys feel needs to happen in terms of, if you wanted to get, and this is my biggest pet peeve nahi, jo bhi mera, like my biggest thing now is ke, how can we get more investors in Pakistan, and what kind of investors need to exist in Pakistan?
I'll answer your first question first in terms of what needs to happen within the ecosystems amongst founders.
Yeah.
I think there is a little bit more trust that needs to be built amongst founders and amongst companies, to be able to come out of this mindset कि यार ये zero sum game है. अगर हम अपनी learnings एक दूसरे से शेयर करेंगे, एक दूसरे से ट्रस्ट करेंगे, सारी कंपनीज इस वक्त सेम प्रॉब्लम से गुजर रही हैं. बट इफ यू टॉक टू समबडी एंड बी लाइक क्या कैसा चल रहा है, एंड बी लाइक हाँ बहुत अच्छा चल रहा है, हम तो we're killing it.
छतें फाड़ें.
हम सब छतें फाड़ें. We're killing it. But when you go deeper into that, you realize that it's the same problem that I'm having, right? Like having those community around the problems and challenges of building companies, is this pretty much the same, just coming together and sharing and maybe learning and expediting your solutions to those problems needs to exist in this market. And it's high time that we start doing that. To your second question, what kind of investors need to exist? I think हर किस्म के investors इस वक्त चाहिए. आपका venture भी चाहिए, आपका debt भी चाहिए, आपका patient capital भी चाहिए. Because if you're talking about taking this ecosystem to the next level, venture is not the only kind of capital that will come into play. In fintech, you need debt.
100%.
Yeah.
And not even in fintech, right? I think it's like
Every
needed
yeah,
in every
like
industry.
Every business
every
needs debt,
industry
yeah.
needs debt.
Why
Every
should all
industry
capital be
also
dilutive?
needs a little bit of patient capital, because you're talking about a lot of consumer behavior changes to happen. Consumer behavior does not happen in silos. There's a lot of education that needs to happen. There's a lot of marketing dollar that needs to be thrown at the consumer to change that kind of behavior as well. और जब तक आपके पास पेशेंट कैपिटल नहीं है प्ले अराउंड करने के लिए, एक्सपेरिमेंट करने के लिए, आप वेंचर कैपिटल को बेहतर तरीके से इस्तेमाल नहीं कर सकते. And then when you have reached a certain scale where venture also doesn't make sense and you need debt, where is that debt going to come from? So
banks are
all
out, yeah.
three kinds of capitals, in my opinion, is required right now. But also, I think investor ke point of view se, understanding of market is also very important. You cannot expect that this market is the same as Indonesia or Vietnam or India or Bangladesh. The nuances of this market is very, very different, and you have to be comfortable with taking those kinds of risks. You talked about macro challenges. Maybe those macro challenges don't exist in any other market. So having that understanding within the challenges of this market is very important. And I think slightly more experienced investor needs to come so that they can guide the founders as well, especially as some companies are moving from early stage to growth stage, right? Growth stage capital किसके पास है यहाँ पर?
नहीं है किसी के
ग्रोथ
पास.
स्टेज एक्सपीरियंस किसके पास है? कितनी कंपनीज ने स्केल करा हुआ है यहाँ पर? So you need founders don't have that experience, but if founders don't have that experience and investors don't have that experience, you're making the same mistake all over again. So you need a little bit more sophisticated, more experienced capital coming into this market now, so that the founders don't make those kind of mistakes again.
No, that's interesting. So, which brings me to my trick question. Not a trick question. If you guys were to invest in one fund that is currently existing in Pakistani market, which one would it be? And neither one of you can say eye to eye.
Neither one of us
Yeah.
can say eye
Can
to
I?
eye.
Sure.
But
give
you
us
don't
three
say it just
reasons.
because I'm here.
Yeah. So let's start with Maha then.
Mubariz, I think there's 4 funds in Pakistan.
Yeah.
I'm married to one. I'm friends with another. I think that rules out the other 2. So I'm going with eye to eye here.
No, but why? Like what? Other
Yeah.
than the ruling out and being married to one,
You can invest in the married fund.
You can
It's
invest
okay.
in your
But would you
husband's
still
fund?
invest? That's the question I want to ask.
Trick
Well,
question.
that was meant as a joke. But in all seriousness, if I was investing in a fund, and God, please, one day let me have the money to do that, it would be eye to eye.
Okay.
And that would be entirely based on, by the way, I got rejected by all funds in Pakistan, but just on the experience I've had as a founder and the process that I've gone through, I think, Kalsoom and Misbar people I'd love to have backed in some way.
Wow. Very sweet.
Thank you. I did not pay her to say that.
Yeah.
She can write a check.
Right.
For me, I think it would be eye to eye. But I'll give my
Eye to eye is
reasoning.
already-
I'll give my
okay.
reasoning. I
Sure.
personally think that as a fund manager, having an experience within the market, understanding the nuances of this market is very, very important. And being a builder in this market as well. And I think out of the funds that exist, Kalsoom has the most amount of experience in this market as well, right? So from my perspective, that would make the most sense. Uske alawa, I think आपका track record तो
She's
सब
also
किसी को
like
पता
half
है.
investor, half babysitter, right? So I feel like anybody she invests in or doesn't invest in gets so much
But there's
support. and
exactly
help.
there's value add that's happening. But if not eye to eye, I would do Indus Valley.
Indus Valley.
Yeah.
And why?
Because of Atif's experience in the venture space, working in a venture-backed organization before.
Yeah. And I think Atif.
The nuances
yeah.
of like
Who would
what
you
does
invest
it
in, Mubariz?
I asked the question.
This is a
I think
conversation
Atif is-
style podcast.
I think if you even speak to portfolio, I think Atif is really well regarded by his portfolio founders as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'd also
I've heard good
say
feedback.
if I was answering the question, and again, like I would get in trouble because most of these guys are all my colleagues, right, and friends. And I actually can say the pros and cons of each and why I would invest in each. I would probably just buy portfolio and companies that I'm like, oh, we're in a lot of similar companies, but even the companies I'm not in that he's in, I would want to invest in that. It would be Faisal Aftab's Zain's portfolio. I think like Faisal has made some really thoughtful investments. I really love his investment in Crave. Like, I think he's invested in Hubble. Like, he has made some really good investments that I was like, some that I'm not in that I would go for. So,
And these are the ones that you would have invested in, these companies? Like Hubble. Like I remember Misbah was on and Misbah spoke about
Misbah said Hubble,
Hubble,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know enough. Misbah's obviously our fintech person too, but at present company excluded, obviously. I think Gossam and Crave is, obviously we had and the thing is like when I don't invest in a founder, and Maha knows this, it doesn't mean that I'm not trying to back you in other ways, right? In
Yeah,
terms
of
of trying to be
course.
supportive and stuff. And I felt that with Crave is that we weren't investing in quick commerce, right? It wasn't a space that we were looking at. We invested in DealCart, which is, not doing quick commerce. And I'm really happy that we backed Amar and Heather, right? But I think Qasim is a really good founder. I think how he's building within quick commerce is really smart. I think from a founder market fit, he's someone that fits what he's building. So, yeah, if I could say outside of Maha, honestly, and it's not just present company. I'm not just saying because of that, because
Yeah, I know.
as
I
much
remember
as
we've had a conversation about this earlier as well.
yeah,
right?
yeah, him and I had this conversation, but I actually genuinely did say Maha because I think that as much as you believe that you are not an entrepreneur, never thought you would be an entrepreneur, I actually think you're a very natural entrepreneur. And so you have that kind of, personality that fits it. And obviously I'm already in Halima's company. So
She didn't want to pay me for my comments earlier. She doesn't do that back at me right now.
So now I see what the consideration was. Now I see the deal. Coming to founders in the ecosystem, which one of the existing founders that you guys know in the ecosystem would you want, say, if you were starting a new startup, would you want as your co-founder?
the founders in the
Yeah.
ecosystem.
I'll take Heather from DealCart.
Heather Dealcart. Why?
Why? One, I think he's great at raising money, and I'd be like, you go do that. I'm going to go
Fair
build our
enough. Yeah.
business.
Yeah, fair enough. It
But
has to
He
be
would hate to
complementary.
do it. He hates raising money.
Two, I think we get along really well. I think we have a great understanding. I think we think about a lot of topics in the same way. And so I think we'd be great building something together.
Omar bin Hassan.
Omar bin Hassan, how about-
These are very popular. Hubble.
Omar bin Hassan, by the way, is a very popular person on this show in the sense that whenever I've spoken to other guests about fintech generally, Omar's name almost always
He's really
comes up.
well regarded.
Yeah, yeah.
Honestly, yeah.
I
And
think
why?
in the fintech space, his understanding of regulations and his ability to manage relationship with different stakeholders from banking perspective, from regulator perspective is just unmatched in this ecosystem.
Yeah, I think he understands systems really well.
He understands
Yeah, yeah.
systems really, and he's very deliberate in his building it. So very creative, but also very deliberate in how he builds. So for that reason, and I think there's a lot of value alignment from personal perspective as well.
Gals.
I can't say my current co-founder.
Yeah, you can't.
Oh, because I honestly would
that's
only
like
build with
already
Misbah
done.
again.
Yeah.
Like genuinely, like we've done a lot of like even work as founders on how to be better with each other. So I would say Misbah, like not hands down again. And I'm not just saying it because you said it. I was thinking about this question as well before this. It would be, and I saw Heather this morning, so maybe it's fresh in my mind. But I would say the same because I think he has a lot of personality traits that I don't have. Like I think he's so specific. I'm not specific. I'm very much like big picture, strategic. I think he's very like you can ask him a question, he will tell you like this specific line items, SKUs, how much they have, and I feel like that type of level of detail I think that he possesses makes him a really good co-founder, at least for me personally, in terms of what I bring to the table versus what he's also a fellow gooner, so it was great.
Okay, so this is something that I also want to discuss, right? Just generally co-founders. So in terms of picking co-founders, and I feel like most companies obviously fail because wrong co-founders.
Yes, totally.
And if not fail, they get derailed significantly. Like you lose a
Yes.
year and a half
Yeah.
because there's something went wrong with the co-founders, right? And you work with so many with eye to eye over a decade, more than a decade now. What do you feel are like what advice would you give to people जो आज अपने co-founder से, people who are choosing a co-founder to build, like Heather, you're saying, and I like the fact that you added that he'd be a great co-founder for you, doesn't mean he'd be a great co-founder for someone else who's also Heather, right?
I was just
Yeah.
gonna say, like,
Yeah.
you need, and that's why Amar and Heather actually balance each other out
Yeah.
really, really well when you see the two of them and what they do together. It's also even, I think about the Truck It In founders, there's 3 of them, but the
Yeah.
3 of them balance each other out really well, right? In terms
Yeah.
of what they do. Yeah, I mean, I think it is that, right? It's like, what do you have that someone else doesn't have? But beyond that, it's also a value alignment, right? Of like, are you moving towards the same goal? How do you operate in terms of what are your values as a human being? I really do think it comes down to that basic question. I think, and I say this in my own co-founder relationship, Mispa and I have known each other for 15 years. We've worked together now for about 6. And working together and knowing each other is a very different thing. But one thing that, always kept us, I think, steady and now really a very strong partnership has been a lot of communication, but also a lot of shared values in terms of shared vision and also shared values about how we were going to do things. So whenever we've said no to a company because of something that we deemed as like off, we were always aligned, and we always joke that we share one brain cell. It would be great if we had multiple, but we oftentimes will see things, we come at things very differently as people. And you guys all know Mispa and I both, right? And it's like we're very different human beings. When we look at a problem, we often come at it very differently. But I think we have a really strong sense of respect for the other person's perspective. And that has been something that has been worked on. Like we've worked on building that respect for each other, because sometimes I think when you haven't done a lot of work on yourself, when you hear someone that has a different perspective from you, it's easy to just, argue about it, fight about it, and that becomes a stalemate later. And I see that in a lot of co-founder relationships where you get so stuck on something that you forget that the other person is supposed to add and enrich your perspective, right? And so I think that's for me personally what I've seen work with us, and it's taken a lot of work, like in a good way, right? We've been really good at being openly communicative with each other, talking things through, nipping things in the bud when things come up. But I would say that, our relationship, knock on all pieces of wood, mashallah, all of that stuff is at a place where it wasn't even a couple of years ago. But like where we are now is why I would hands down work with Mispa again, or I would only work with Mispa.
So you didn't answer the question about
What was my question? What was the question?
Heather,
who
Heather.
else? Oh yeah, Heather. So yeah, you did
Heather,
mention Heather.
Heather.
Yeah, yeah. So
I
it's
did.
not her.
I
Yeah,
did
yeah,
answer the
sorry,
question,
sorry.
and you
I
did
forgot.
ask about like what is it that you should look for. It's
Yeah, of course. Sorry. Yeah, but
answer the
okay. One more thing is that in my experience that I've come across is that more important than like there's no way you'll ever find a co-founder that you won't have a dispute with. Like that's not possible. It's really important to figure out a mechanism of how you'll resolve disputes, right?
Can I
Yeah.
answer that question? I think
100%.
when you're looking for co-founder as a founder, think about it from the perspective of you're getting into a marriage.
Yeah.
Same way you would look for a life partner, you would be looking for a
Co-founder, yeah.
co-founder. And as you get into a marriage, there are contracts that you sign. There are non-negotiables, rules, whatever you want to, however you want to your nikah to be. It's a similar kind of a founder's agreement that you need to get into. A lot of it, choosing the right partner is also knowing what you want as a human being in your life. So having a clear understanding of what your values are, what you like, what you don't like, where is what kind of skill set you have, what are you going to what is the other person going to contribute within your life. It's the same process, and oftentimes we forget about that because you have to understand that this person that you are building the business with will be spending actually more time than you would be spending with your life partner.
100%.
So you have to really like that human being. It's the basic, like, do you like that human being?
Yeah.
That
and
you
respect it.
are willing to spend
And
your
can you trust
days,
that human being?
trust, enjoy their company, get inspired by all of that stuff. अगर उस पूरी checklist में से एक भी चीज नहीं चल रही ना, don't get into that
Agreed.
relationship. Because it is, at the end of the day, your company is an extension of the values that you bring to the table, and that value alignment with the human being has to be there for you to build that successful business. Otherwise, things will fall apart. So for me now, it's a basic checklist. When I was looking for my life partner, did these things work out? It didn't. I'm not gonna get into this relationship, and it's not just co-founder. I think it is also your leadership team.
And that's as important.
Yes,
Mhm.
100%. 100%. You have to find people who are value aligned with you. कहीं भी mismatch हो जाए, चाहे वो कितने भी competent हो, वो नहीं चलेगी relationship.
Okay.
And what was the question about disputes? Like how to
Yeah.
resolve
So
it?
how have you seen the best co-founder teams, and how did you and Mispa, like, how whenever you've had a dispute, how have you guys, like, what is the mechanism, or what are the, like, how do you figure that out or navigate through that?
You have to be very open. I think I always believe this, that every time someone is saying something in a dispute, and I say this as, um, you guys know this, I have a master's in conflict resolution. I use it way more. I don't use it for conflicts in the world. I use it way more as an investor now, right? And
Yeah, of course.
I always think this, that when a dispute is happening, there is what people are saying is the problem, and then there's the subtext of
Yeah.
what they're saying, right? Your goal, and I say this as someone who's mediated conflict in our portfolio, like in our teams, your goal as a mediator is to get to the subtext and to get them to listen to the subtext, right? And to get them to understand and respect each other's subtext of what's happening. As when you're in the conflict, it's really hard when you're on the opposite side to take a step back and to do that. But we've definitely tried to do that. We've also had, and we did this like as a, cause just as like, people who are married should have a marriage therapist, whether or not they need it, right? I think a
Yeah.
lot of people should have it. We've had a coach for the two of us before. I've had my own individual executive coach, and Miss and I've had an amazing co-founder coach. Shout out to Sham, he's awesome. When he worked with us, it was having that third party sometimes that helped us kind of see, and it wasn't even like we were in conflict, right? It was just really helpful for us to also learn more about each other, and then as a result, have more respect for where the other person was coming from.
So in this coaching session, what was the big things that you learned? Like, so communication is one big thing, that, like, communicate more openly, learn about each other's
I think it's
values.
just understanding like where the other person was coming from, right? So oftentimes if you see yourself even in a co-founder dispute, you notice this in marriage, right? Like your husband and you or your significant other and you are having the same fight over and over again. But if you don't understand why that fight is happening, it's the subtext behind it, right? It's like they keep fighting with you about like that you're I'm thinking about my own husband. He's always late, right? And it's like I love him, but like I can never get him to be on time, and he knows that that drives me crazy. So, but when I take a step back, I realize he's just a time optimist. It's like he doesn't plan ahead, and like he'll be in something. And so if I know that, it's like the Einstein thing of like, what's it? Insanity is like doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. If you keep having the same fight and you're not trying to come at it from a different angle and actually saying like, why is this person doing it, and not that they are doing it, it kind of helps you have a little bit more empathy and understanding of like getting to the root cause here. And if you can kind of address that in your conversation, that really helps. And then also it gives you a little bit more empathy in a conversation. Like if my co-founder and I are having a dispute, sometimes I'll realize that it's coming from a place that's not actually what this argument is about. It's about something else, right? And so honestly, it takes a lot of work to get there. It takes a lot of introspection. It takes a lot of like saying that you're not always the right all the time. And I really love the Brene Brown quote of "You're not here to be right, you're here to get it right," and that
Yeah.
helps. That helps guide me so much sometimes in conversations.
It's also constant work. Like you can't expect that once you've resolved
Yeah,
or you
this is
found
actually,
this
yeah.
life partner, everything is magically going to solve, or this marriage is going to last forever. It's constant work. Constant work on yourself, constant work on the other partner, constant deliberate work on your relationship as well. And with businesses, it just becomes difficult to work on your relationship when you have to also work on your business.
Yeah.
And that's where the conflict happens. But having said that, I think prepare for the worst. So having the contracts in place, like when you're getting into nikanama as well, like you're
Yeah.
not saying कि यार कल divorce हो जाएगा तो मुझे अपने सारे चीजें
Yeah.
लिख लेनी चाहिए. It's the same with the founder agreement as well. कि you have to have everything listed out that in case there is a dispute happening, it's an amicable dispute, resolution.
Yeah, or this
Right?
clarity
Yeah,
around
yeah,
which way it
yeah,
would
yeah,
go.
yeah.
Last question. Solo founders. Maha, how hard is it? Would you recommend it? Uh, did you try to get a co-founder, or were like how
I
did
don't
it
know
work?
why nobody knows this. I've had 2 co-founders.
I knew it.
I didn't
gone
know
through
this.
I didn't know
What?
this.
This is news for me. Did you know this?
No.
I knew
There you
it.
go.
I've gone through 2 co-founders.
Okay.
Um,
And share like whatever you want to share about that.
Look, I think that, I mean, they gave the example of a life partner in a relationship. I think it's great to have a partner, but I think having a bad partner versus being
It's-
alone, you're better off
Yeah.
being single,
Right.
right? And I
100%.
think it works the same way. I would have loved to have a co-founder. I think about it all the time. I think life would be so much simpler. I would get some sleep.
Yeah, someone would be doing the fundraising, like you just said. Yeah.
That's definitely what I would throw on that person, 100%. But it just didn't work out that way for me. I started with a co-founder who I think got on a few fundraising calls and said, no, we have to pivot because this is not what investors want. And I was very clear that I'm not building for investors. I'm building.
Yeah, for the users.
Yeah, I'm building for the users. And so he left, and then came another co-founder, lasted on a slightly higher number of calls, and then I think had the same perspective that this is just too hard. Also suggested a pivot. I was not interested in pivoting. And so I kept going on my own. And I think at that point I figured I'm spending so much time on trying to convince another human being to believe in what I'm doing. I might as well just spend that time working. And I think I
Makes
just got
sense.
on with it. But I'm 100% in favor of people having co-founders. I think if you can have more than one, even better. But I think, like Halima said, you have to like that person, and I think you really have to trust that person. I haven't found, a third person that does that for me.
Last question. Sorry, I know we're over time.
Last and last.
Last and last
So
question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, how do you, as an investor, view solo founders, companies? Like, does the risk profile change versus co-founders? Like, how's the in
It's
terms of
just
valuation?
it's a different risk profile. We've invested in solo founders before, and I think the challenge is it's key. We call it key man or key woman risk, right? It's like if tomorrow they decide to just stop doing the company, there's nobody else that it can fall to. At the same time, there's co-founder risk, and I talked
Yeah.
about even if we had invested in married couples, it's like what if they break up? Similar to co-founders, what if they break up too and decide tomorrow they don't want to do this? What will happen to the company then? And I think with solo founders, the challenge is that fundraising, as Maha knows, takes up so much time. It eats away. And so if there is at least another founder there, it can help distribute the load. Also, oftentimes, one founder can do something really well and the other founder complements them in some way, right? But I think at the same time, if you are a solo founder, you can still build a very strong team around you, like a senior team. I think for me, a red flag is when you see a solo founder that even raises capital, but they're hiring a bunch of chotas like around them versus like senior C-suite level people, right? And that's when you're like, okay, this is not someone that's really thinking about building a company that is going to last beyond them, right? And it's like you want to think about that. Like, are you going to be doing this? Are you going to be the CEO that runs this company 10 years from now, right? Like, what are you doing to kind of build that institution in place for that? So I do think that building kind of a strong team around you helps to mitigate some of that risk when you're looking at it from an investment perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I think that's really really good advice, and this is something that I tell a lot of solo founders around. Why a lot of investors are kind of wary of solo founders, but like Maha said, like if you can't find the right co-founder, you're
Don't
better
do
off
it.
being
Yeah,
Yeah, but also I've had the luxury of a great founding team, right? And I think
yeah.
that makes up for it. And Kalsoom's right. I spend most of my time fundraising and doing other absurd things. It's business as usual. And I think, I have founding members who could have been co-founders and who I'm sure will be founders down the line, right? And I think that's just manage that risk for me.
Perfect. Thanks so much, guys. I know we're over time, over what I promised
Surprise, surprise.
that we would end by. But thanks so much. We can wrap it up.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.